Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. Some stories are about a single moment of betrayal, a knife twisted once. My story is about a death. Not a real death, I would later learn, but a meticulously crafted illusion that cost me 5 years of my life. It's a story about a ghost who was never a ghost, and the man who had to become one to find justice. For 10 years, Serafina was my world. Not a part of it, but the entire thing. The axis on which my life turned. We had the kind of love people write about, or so I foolishly believed. It was built on shared dreams whispered in the dark, inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else, and the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other's souls. Our great passion was the sea. We weren't rich, but we saved every spare dollar for our small, second-hand sailboat, the Siren. It was our escape, our church, our kingdom. Every weekend, we'd be out on the water, the salt spray on our faces, the endless blue horizon promising a future as vast and beautiful as the ocean itself. Serafina was never more alive than when she was at the helm, her hair whipping in the wind, her eyes sparkling with a fierce, untamable joy. She was a force of nature, and I was content to be the anchor that kept her tethered, or so I thought. The day it happened was unremarkable, a perfect day for sailing. A steady wind, a clear sky. We were miles from shore, just enjoying the solitude, the rhythmic creak of the boat, the call of the gulls. I went below deck to make us some sandwiches, a simple domestic act that would haunt me for years. I wasn't down there for more than 5 minutes. When I came back up, the cockpit was empty. The wheel was spinning freely, and Serafina was gone. Just gone. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I screamed her name until my throat was raw, my voice swallowed by the indifferent wind. I scanned the waves, my eyes burning, praying for a flash of color, a hand, anything. There was nothing, just the endless churning expanse of the sea. I radioed the Coast Guard, my voice cracking, incoherent with terror. The search started within the hour. For 3 days they scoured the ocean. Helicopters beat the air above, cutters sliced through the waves below. I stayed on my boat, a hollowed-out shell of a man, refusing to leave the spot where I'd last seen her. I pointed them to the strong currents, the treacherous spots she, an expert sailor, would have known about. They found a piece of her life vest washed up on a rocky outcrop 10 miles south, torn and frayed. It was the only trace of her they ever found. After a week, the search was called off. She was presumed lost at sea, drowned. The official explanation was that a rogue wave or a sudden gust of wind must have knocked her overboard while I was below. It was a freak accident, tragic but plausible. I was the grieving husband, an object of immense pity. Friends and family rallied around me, their hushed words and sad eyes a constant, suffocating reminder of my new reality. The world had turned gray, the volume of life turned down to a muted hum. I sold the boat. I couldn't even look at it without the metallic taste of panic filling my mouth. The sea, our shared love, had become a monster, a vast, unmarked grave. The house grew silent and large, filled with the ghosts of her laughter, the scent of her perfume lingering in the closet, her favorite mug sitting untouched by the sink. Grief is not a clean wound. It's a messy, festering thing that infects every corner of your existence. For 2 years, I barely functioned. I went to work, I paid the bills, I existed, but I wasn't living. I was a man waiting for something, though I didn't know what. Perhaps for time to heal the wound, or perhaps just for the waiting to be over. About 6 months after she disappeared, the life insurance check arrived. We had taken out policies on each other years ago, a sensible, responsible thing for a young married couple to do. It was a substantial amount, $2 million. Seeing that number on the paper made me physically ill. It felt like blood money, a grotesque payment for the person I loved. I couldn't touch it. I deposited it into a trust account and left it there, a morbid monument to my loss. It was her legacy, and the thought of spending it on anything felt like a desecration of her memory. Time, as it does, moved on. The sharp, stabbing pain of grief slowly dulled into a chronic ache, a constant companion in my quiet life. I started to piece myself back together, not as the man I was, but as someone new, someone forged in loss. I poured all my energy into my work as an architectural consultant. I took on more projects, traveled more, anything to keep my mind occupied, to outrun the silence that waited for me at home. 5 years. 5 years I lived as the widower, the tragic figure whose wife was stolen by the sea. I carried her memory with me everywhere. I learned to smile again, to have conversations that weren't about her, but she was always there, a phantom limb, an ache that never truly went away. I had accepted my fate. My life was to be a story of what if, a long, quiet epilogue to a love story cut short. It was a business trip to Portland, Oregon, a city I had never been to before that changed everything. I was there to consult on a new downtown development. After a long day of meetings, I decided to walk back to my hotel to see a bit of the city. I wandered through a street market, the air filled with the smells of food and the sound of local musicians. It was a lively, happy scene, a world away from my own quiet existence. And then I saw her. She was standing at a flower stall, her back to me, but it was her. The way she stood, the curve of her neck, the auburn highlights in her hair that only appeared in the sunlight. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. It was a trick of the light, my grief projecting her image onto a stranger. People have doppelgangers. It was a cruel coincidence. I started to turn away, to dismiss it, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. But then she turned her head to speak to someone, and I saw her profile. The slight upturn of her nose, the shape of her chin. It was Serafina, my Serafina. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I had to grab onto a light post to steady myself. She was laughing, a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. A man stood beside her, his arm around her waist. A child, a little boy of about 4, was holding her other hand, chattering away at her. She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. The domestic, ordinary scene was the most surreal and horrifying thing I had ever witnessed. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't a look-alike. This was my wife, alive, healthy, and living another life. A life with a new husband and a son who would have been conceived right around the time she died. The world tilted on its axis, and everything I thought I knew, everything I had built my broken life upon for the last 5 years, shattered into a million pieces. The grief, the pain, the unending loneliness, it wasn't a tragedy. It was a transaction. My 5 years of suffering had been the price of her new beginning. The $2 million insurance policy wasn't a safety net. It was the entire point. She hadn't been taken by the sea. She had escaped into it, leaving me to drown in her wake. I watched them, my feet rooted to the pavement, a cold, chemical fire spreading through my veins. The sorrow I had carried for so long was burning away, being replaced by something else, something harder and infinitely more dangerous. It was rage, yes, but it was more than that. It was a chilling, absolute clarity. I could have walked across the street. I could have confronted her right there, blown her new, perfect life to smithereens in a single, explosive moment. But as I watched her smile at her new husband, a complete stranger, I knew that wouldn't be enough. A quick, messy scene was what she deserved, but it wasn't what I needed. She had let me believe she was dead for 5 years. She had planned meticulously for my pain. She had turned my love into her escape hatch. A public confrontation would be a release for her, a final severing. No, she didn't deserve an ending. She deserved a process. She deserved to feel the slow, creeping dread of a life unraveling for reasons she couldn't understand. She had made me a ghost in my own life. It was only fair that I return the favor. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking not with shock anymore, but with a newfound terrible purpose. I didn't call the police. I took a picture. A clear, high-resolution photo of Serafina, or whoever she was now, and her new family. Then I turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd. The grieving husband was dead. In his place stood something else entirely. The consultation project in Portland was no longer my priority. My new project was her. The flight back home was a blur. I sat in my window seat, staring out at the clouds, the engine's drone a hollow echo of the storm raging inside me. The photo on my phone was a constant, damning presence. I'd look at it, zoom in on her face, older, a few new lines around her eyes, but unmistakably her, and the cold fury would solidify a little more, hardening from a molten rage into something sharp and precise, like obsidian. My grief had been a fog, but this new reality was a landscape of crystalline clarity. Every memory of our life together was now tainted, suspect. I replayed our last few months, searching for the signs I'd so blindly missed. Her sudden insistence on updating our life insurance policies, which at the time I'd seen as responsible planning. Her renewed interest in solo sailing trips to clear her head. The strange, distant sadness in her eyes that I had mistaken for stress, but now saw as the quiet contemplation of a jailer planning her escape. She had been acting a part for months, maybe even years, laying the groundwork for her grand finale, and I, the loving husband, had been her most devoted audience member. The moment I landed, I went not to my empty house, but to my office. The $2 million from her life insurance policy had sat dormant in a trust account for 5 years, accumulating interest, a silent testament to my loss. Now it had a new purpose. It was no longer a memorial fund. It was a war chest. My first move was to hire the best private investigator money could buy. I didn't want a run-of-the-mill PI who specialized in cheating spouses. I needed a ghost, someone who could operate in the shadows, who could excavate a life without leaving a single footprint. I found him through a series of discreet referrals, a man named Corbin, a former intelligence analyst who now ran a boutique corporate security firm. He was expensive, clinical, and utterly devoid of sentiment, which made him perfect. In his sterile, soundproofed office, I laid it all out. I showed him the photo. I told him her name was Serafina, that she was my legally deceased wife. I told him the date and circumstances of her death. I didn't tell him what I planned to do. I simply said I needed to know everything about the woman in the picture. Her new name, her new husband, their child, their business, their friends, their debts, their routines, their weaknesses. I wanted a complete blueprint of the life she had built on my ashes. Corbin didn't flinch. He just listened, his eyes scanning the photo, and made a few notes on a tablet. He told me it would take a week. He delivered in 4 days. The portfolio he sent to my encrypted email was a masterpiece of clandestine information gathering. Her new name was Laura Thorne. Her husband was Marcus Thorne, a moderately successful real estate developer. Their son was named Leo. They lived in a beautiful, sprawling house in a wealthy Portland suburb. They were, by all accounts, pillars of their community. Serafina, Laura, owned a thriving business, an upscale home decor and lifestyle boutique called the Gilded Sparrow. It was her passion project, a curated collection of artisanal furniture, local art, and chic housewares. The business was her identity. She was featured in local magazines, she sat on community boards, she hosted charity events. She hadn't just created a new life, she had created a perfect one. Corbin's report was exhaustive. It included their financial statements, which showed the business was heavily leveraged, profitable but vulnerable to market shifts. It included Marcus's online footprint, which hinted at a fondness for high-stakes online poker, a small but potentially significant crack in their perfect facade. It included the layout of their home, the name of their son's private school, the license plates of their cars, the names of their closest friends. I read the entire document 3 times, memorizing every detail. I knew what wine she served at dinner parties, what jogging path she took in the mornings, what anxiety she confessed to her new best friend, according to her social media trail. I became the omniscient narrator of her life, a god she didn't know existed. With this information, the plan began to form, not as a single act of vengeance, but as a campaign, a slow, methodical siege. My goal wasn't to destroy her with a bomb, but to dismantle her world brick by brick. So slowly that by the time she noticed the walls were crumbling, she'd already be trapped in the ruins. My first target was her business. The Gilded Sparrow was the heart of her new identity. It was her pride, her social standing, her creation. It had to be the first thing to die. I couldn't attack it directly. It had to look like death by 1,000 cuts, the slow, unlucky decline of a once thriving enterprise. I started by creating an army of ghosts online. Using VPNs and sophisticated bot networks, I began a campaign of negative reviews. They weren't obvious, 1-star rants. They were subtle, cleverly written 3-star and 2-star reviews that chipped away at the boutique's reputation. They praised the aesthetic but lamented the outrageous prices. They mentioned a lovely product that fell apart after a week. They spoke of a rude or dismissive staff member on a particular day. Each review was specific, plausible, and posted over weeks from different accounts, creating a slow downward trend in her online ratings. Next, I attacked her supply chain. Through Corbin, I identified her key suppliers, small, independent artisans who created the unique pieces that made her store a destination. I began to buy them out. Anonymously, through a shell corporation I set up, I would contact these artisans and offer them exclusive, highly lucrative contracts. My offers were too good to refuse. I paid them double what Serafina was paying, on the sole condition that they terminate their relationship with the Gilded Sparrow. One by one, her star suppliers started pulling out, citing new exclusivity deals. She would be left scrambling, her unique inventory replaced by more generic, less desirable items. The final piece of the business attack was the most audacious. Corbin's research had identified a vacant retail space directly across the street from the Gilded Sparrow. Using another shell company, I leased it. I then spent a significant portion of the insurance money, her money, to create a rival store. I hired a top-tier design firm to create a boutique that was brighter, more modern, and more inviting than hers. I sourced better products from international markets, the kinds of things she could only dream of stocking. And I set our prices at a level that was just low enough to be undeniably better value, but not so low as to look cheap. We would be her direct competitor, her nightmare, designed from the ground up to bleed her dry. I managed the entire project remotely, a phantom CEO making decisions from 1,000 miles away. The store, which I ironically named the Phoenix, was set to open in 3 months. While the gears of that plan were turning, I started on the second front, her marriage. Corbin's intel on Marcus's online poker habit was the key. It wasn't a full-blown addiction, not yet, but it was a weakness, a secret he kept from his perfect wife. I had Corbin's team set up a honeypot. They created a high-stakes, invitation-only online poker site designed to look exclusive and legitimate. An invitation was subtly engineered to find its way to Marcus. The games were rigged, not obviously, but with a sophisticated algorithm that would let him win at first. He would get a taste of easy money, his confidence would soar, and he'd start betting bigger and bigger. Then the algorithm would slowly, mercilessly turn against him, encouraging him to chase his losses with ever more reckless bets. He would be digging his own financial grave, convinced it was just a string of bad luck, all while I watched from the sidelines. The plan was in motion. The pieces were moving on the board, manipulated by an invisible hand. I was living a double life. To the world, I was Alastair Finch, the quiet, respectable architectural consultant, the man still healing from a tragedy. But in the secrecy of my home office, late at night, I was a strategist, a puppet master, meticulously orchestrating the slow-motion collapse of a woman's life. I felt no guilt. Any flicker of the love I once had for her was gone, burned away by the cold fire of her betrayal. She had sentenced me to 5 years in a prison of grief. I had no intention of killing her or having her arrested. That would be too merciful. My sentence for her was different. She would live, but she would lose everything she had died to gain. She would be left with nothing but the life she faked a death to escape. And when she was at her absolute lowest, when her perfect world was a smoldering ruin around her, I would step out of the shadows. She wouldn't just know she had lost, she would know who beat her. The 3 months leading up to the opening of the Phoenix were the longest of my life. I was a general watching his armies move into position, every day bringing a new report from the front lines. Corbin fed me a steady stream of information, painting a picture of Serafina's, or Laura's, slowly contracting world. The online reviews were working their insidious magic. I could see her responding to them personally in the comment sections, her tone shifting from polite and professional to defensive and strained. Foot traffic to her store was down, according to surveillance data. Sales were slumping. Her social media, once a vibrant stream of beautifully staged products and happy customers, now had an edge of desperation, with constant sales and discount announcements. Her suppliers pulling out had hit her hard. Corbin's reports included frantic emails she'd sent trying to woo them back, her confusion and anger palpable as they each gave her a vague corporate excuse. She was being forced to stock her shelves with inferior products, and her discerning customers were noticing. The gilded sparrow was losing its gilded edge. Meanwhile, Marcus was sinking deeper into the trap I had set. The rigged poker site was draining him. He was winning just enough to keep him hooked, but his losses were mounting into the tens of thousands. He was chasing the dragon, convinced the next big win was just one hand away. Corbin's financial tracking showed him taking out a secret personal loan, then a second. He was moving money from their joint accounts into his own, trying to hide the hemorrhaging from his wife. The perfect couple was beginning to fray at the seams. I could almost picture their evenings, her stressed and worried about the inexplicable decline of her business, him distracted and irritable, his mind on the money he'd lost and the desperate gambles he'd need to win it back. They were two people in a beautiful house, living separate, secret nightmares. I orchestrated it all with a chilling detachment, reviewing the data from my quiet, empty home. I was 1,000 miles away, yet I was a constant, unseen presence in their lives, a poltergeist in their financial statements, a ghost whispering doubt into their relationship. The day the Phoenix opened was a major offensive. I had spared no expense on the launch. We had a press event, local influencers, champagne, and a massive sale. From across the street, Serafina watched as hundreds of people, her former customers among them, streamed into her new, shiny competitor. Corbin sent me a photo of her taken with a long lens, standing just inside the door of the Gilded Sparrow, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a grim, dark satisfaction. It was the feeling of a plan perfectly executed. The Phoenix was an immediate, resounding success. We were new, we were cheaper, and we had the unique, high-quality inventory she had lost. We systematically starved her business of its oxygen. Every dollar a customer spent with us was a dollar she didn't get. Her sales plummeted. Within 2 months, she was forced to lay off 2 of her 3 employees. A month after that, she was working the store herself from open to close, 7 days a week, her exhaustion and despair evident to anyone who walked in. The stress was taking its toll on her marriage. Marcus, now deep in a hole of his own making, had no emotional capacity to support her. The argument started, according to audio snippets from a discreet listening device Corbin's team had planted in their car. They were quiet at first, then increasingly frequent and bitter. She accused him of not caring about her business, about her stress. He accused her of being obsessed with the store, of spending too much money. They were both right, and both completely blind to the real cause of their problems. Now it was time to turn up the heat, to push their private anxieties into public view. I had Corbin's team leak information about Marcus's growing debts to a local credit agency. It wasn't illegal, it was just a carefully placed anonymous tip from a concerned party. This triggered a review of their joint finances. Their credit rating took a nosedive. The bank called in the loan on her business. Suddenly, they were facing a financial catastrophe. They needed a massive injection of cash to stay afloat, and they had no way of getting it. This was when the true poison of my plan began to work. Serafina, backed into a corner, would have to turn to the one person she believed could help her, her successful developer husband. I can only imagine the scene when she finally confronted him, begging for his help, only for him to confess that he was in his own financial hell. The revelation of his gambling debts, of the secret loans, of the money he'd siphoned from their accounts must have been the final devastating blow. The man she had built her new life with was just as much a fraud as she was. He wasn't her partner, he was an anchor, dragging her down. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Their fighting became explosive. They put their beautiful house on the market in a desperate attempt to liquidate assets. But the housing market was slow, and they were forced to list it at a price far below what they'd paid. Marcus's development project stalled due to their trashed credit. He was facing lawsuits from his own investors. The perfect life was not just crumbling, it was imploding. Serafina's perfect world had become a prison of debt, suspicion, and resentment. She was losing everything. The business she had created, the beautiful home she inhabited, the trust in her new husband. She was working herself to the bone in a failing store, coming home to a man she now despised, her son caught in the crossfire of their silent, bitter war. From my distant vantage point, I watched the demolition with a surgeon's precision. There was no joy in it, only a cold, methodical sense of justice, of balancing the scales. For 5 years, my world had been a quiet, gray ruin. Now, hers was a loud, colorful, spectacular one. She had faked a death to escape a life with me, seeking a perfect, gilded existence. I had simply shown her that her new cage, though beautiful, was just as fragile as the old one. The final step was to take away her business for good. The gilded sparrow was on its last legs. The bank was threatening foreclosure. She was desperate. Through another shell corporation, I made her an offer to buy the business. It was a lowball offer, an insult, just enough to cover her outstanding bank loan and leave her with almost nothing. It was her only way out, the only way to avoid a bankruptcy that would ruin her financially for years. After a week of agonizing silence, she accepted. I now owned the hollowed-out shell of her dream. The first thing I did as the new anonymous owner was to fire her. The termination letter was sent by a lawyer, a cold, impersonal document ending her last connection to the identity she had so carefully constructed. She was no longer Laura Thorne, the successful boutique owner. She was just a woman with a failed marriage, a mountain of shared debt, and no career. The siege was over. The city had fallen. All that was left was for the conquering ghost to walk through the gates and survey his work.
It was time for her to see my face. She had lost everything. The house was sold at a loss, the proceeds swallowed by debts. Marcus, disgraced and broken, had moved back in with his parents in another state, the separation a prelude to an inevitable, messy divorce. Serena, Laura, was living in a small, grim apartment on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place people go when they have no other options. She had taken a job as a cashier at a grocery store to make ends meet. The gilded sparrow sat empty, a for lease sign in the window, while across the street the phoenix thrived. I had won, but the victory felt incomplete. It was all meaningless until she knew. She needed to understand that this wasn't a string of bad luck, it was a reckoning. I chose the location for our reunion carefully. It was the 1-year anniversary of the opening of the Phoenix. I flew to Portland. my heart a cold, steady drum in my chest. I didn't go to her apartment or her workplace. That was too brutish. I went to the waterfront, a place I knew from Corbin's reports that she sometimes went to on her day off, to sit and stare at the water. It was a Tuesday. I found her on a bench, looking out at the river, a solitary, diminished figure wrapped in a coat that had seen better days. The vibrant, confident woman I had seen at the market a year ago was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and beaten, hollowed out by failure. I walked up slowly and sat down at the other end of the bench. For a long moment, she didn't notice me. She was lost in her own world of regret. Then she shifted her gaze, and her eyes met mine. The reaction was not what I had expected. There was no immediate scream of recognition. There was just a flicker of confusion, a deep furrow in her brow, as if her brain was trying to place a familiar face from a dream she couldn't quite remember. The man she knew, the husband she had left for dead, was older now. My hair was shorter, there was gray at my temples, and my eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there before. But then the connection was made. Her eyes widened, the color draining from her face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked like she had seen a ghost, which, in a way, she had. I had come back from the dead, and I was sitting right next to her. "Hello, Serena," I said. My voice was calm, even. The sound of her real name, a name she probably hadn't heard in years, seemed to physically jolt her. "It can't be," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. You're dead." "I've been better," I said, a humorless smile touching my lips. Turns out, grief is a terrible houseguest. It overstays its welcome. Her mind was racing, the terror and disbelief warring on her face. She looked around, as if expecting me to dissolve into thin air. I didn't need to yell or accuse. My presence was the only accusation that mattered. I let the silence stretch, letting her absorb the impossibility of the moment. Finally, she found her voice. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone trembling. "The insurance money?" "Oh, no," I said, leaning back on the bench. "I put that to good use. Think of it as a startup fund for a project I've been working on for the past year." I watched her as the pieces began to click into place in her mind. The timing, the strange, relentless bad luck. "The reviews," she whispered, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "The suppliers, the store across the street, the Phoenix." I gave a slight nod. "I always thought you had a good eye for business," I said, "but your location was just too good to pass up. And it turns out when you have $2 million to play with, you can afford to be very competitive." I told her everything. I calmly and with meticulous detail walked her through the last year. I told her about Corbin. I told her about the bots that destroyed her reputation online. I told her how I bought out her artisans. I told her about the rigged poker site that drained her husband's finances and destroyed her marriage. I left no stone unturned. I wanted her to see the full, intricate architecture of her own destruction. With every sentence, the last vestiges of her composure crumbled. She wasn't just defeated, she was annihilated. The life she had killed for hadn't been lost to chance. It had been systematically dismantled and repossessed by the man she had left behind. She had thought she was the clever one, the master manipulator. In reality, she had been a pawn in a much longer, much quieter game. When I was finished, she just stared at me, tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of utter, abject ruin. "Why?" she finally choked out. "Why not just turn me in?" "I thought about it," I admitted. "Prison would have been easy, an ending. You didn't deserve an ending. You deserved an education. I wanted you to feel what I felt for 5 years, the helplessness, the confusion. I wanted you to watch everything you loved turn to dust for reasons you couldn't understand. I wanted you to live in the ruins.
Prison would have been a mercy. I stood up, my part in this story finally over. I had balanced the scales. I looked down at her, a broken woman on a park bench, the ghost of a life she once had. She had nothing and no one. She was alive, but her life was over. That was a sentence far more profound than any court could deliver. "The money is gone, Serafina," I said, my voice soft but final. "I used it all to tear you down. The company that owns the Phoenix has been dissolved, the assets liquidated. The ghost has finished his haunting. What you do now is of no interest to me." I turned and walked away without looking back. I didn't feel triumph or joy or even satisfaction. I just felt quiet. The rage was gone. The grief was gone. The gnawing obsession that had driven me for the past year was finally extinguished. I flew home that night, and for the first time in 6 years, I slept without dreaming. The next morning, I sold my house, the one filled with her memory, and I bought a small cabin in the mountains, a place with no ocean in sight. My revenge was complete, not because I had destroyed her, but because I had finally freed myself. She had to live with what she'd done. I no longer had to. Before you go, I have to ask, what was the moment someone's mask fell off in your life? Share it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Reddit Whispers for more jaw-dropping true stories.